How did an anti-government protest turn into a full-blown war? How did the world powers get sucked into a small West Asian country's politics? What is in it for the regional rivals? Our next report tells you the story about how Syria lost its last decade.
15th of March, 2011. Syrians first responded to a social media call to demonstrate against the Bashar al-Assad regime. 3 days later, 4 demonstrators were killed. Hundreds of rebel groups ranging from secular to criminal gangs and moderate Islamists to brutal extremists began emerging both for and against the government. Amid all this, the Free Syrian Army was formed, a civilian armed group which stood against Assad's dictatorship. In 2012, world leaders met in Geneva for the first time, addressing what was unfolding in Syria. They agreed on the need for a political challenge, but failed to act on it. What they didn't know was that this defeat was going to foil a decade of UN-sponsored peace efforts. United States took cognizance in 2013. On being asked what would push Obama to intervene, the Nobel Peace Prize winner said, "The red line," referring to the use of chemical weapons. Soon reports poured in. Syrian army had allegedly used chemical weapons on a densely populated rebel-held area, eastern Ghouta. 1,400 civilians died, a claim that Bashar al-Assad vehemently denies.
So if the Syrian army wanted to use those kind of weapons, why don't he use it against the terrorists who's been in the field, not against the civilians? So all this story doesn't have, let's say, legs to stand on. It's not realistic, it's not logical. So who's behind it? It was simply the United States and the Western intelligence with the terrorists. They staged this play just to have pretext to attack Syria.
The United States stayed mute. Less than 6 months later, an al-Qaeda splinter group seized the city of Raqqa, Islamic State of Syria and Iraq. The group took advantage of the regional chaos and declared the territory across the border of the two nations as Caliphate. Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria being the two strongholds. At this point, the United States decided to intervene. The US military built an anti-Islamic state coalition along with 50 other NATO countries. The Obama administration called for the end of the Assad regime in Syria, yet only devoted enough resources to prevent the rebels from losing rather than actually winning. The US was put in a difficult position with an ally, Turkey. The Obama administration was fighting ISIS in cooperation with Kurdish fighters. But the Kurds are financed by the Kurdish Workers' Party fighting in Turkey for almost 3 decades now. For Ankara, groups like ISIS are a fundamental security issue, but the Kurds are an existential one. By 2015, the Syrian army lost grounds in many of its towns and cities. But the late of 2015 saw a U-turn in the course of the civil war. Iran and Russia joined the war on Assad's side. Vladimir Putin deployed warplanes, provided military aid and swiftly turned the course of conflict against the rebels. Then, year after year, Assad's military, backed by the Russians, regained control. Siege, bombardment and death of thousands of civilians brought back the biggest urban base of Aleppo in December 2016. For Syria's all-weather allies like Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah, it's a regional necessity to stand by Assad. But what's in it for Russia? Moscow aims to secure its military influence in the region by keeping Assad in power. Putin's involvement in Syria is creating pressure on the West, especially on the United States. Russia has become an unavoidable geopolitical mediator in West Asia. One can't deny that Russia has brought the much-needed stability in Syria. 2017 also saw the downfall of Islamic State. ISIS was fighting a multi-front war against almost every state in the region simultaneously. United States-backed Kurdish-led forces defeated Islamic State in Raqqa, a stronghold of the terror group. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump kept puzzling allies by reversing major political decisions of previous administrations. Trump wasn't seen as a match for Vladimir Putin in terms of experience, domestic popularity, and influence. Trump declared that the United States defeated ISIS in Syria at a premature stage, leaving US allies in doubt. But the gradual disappearance of ISIS and al-Qaeda-controlled groups enabled the regime to recover and take power into their hands again. In April 2018, after months of air raids, the Russian-backed army recaptured eastern Ghouta and then took over the city where the civil war started, Dara. Next was the last rebel-held city, Idlib. Early 2020 brought a glimmer of hope for civilians. On March 5th, Russia and Turkey agreed on a ceasefire over Idlib, vowing to hold joint patrols and establish a secure corridor.
The ceasefire deal will be effective starting from 12:01 as of midnight. In terms of making it lasting, all necessary actions will be taken fast and efficiently. Our goal is to prevent the worsening of the humanitarian crisis in the region. We will work together to supply aid for all the Syrians in need without any precondition and discrimination.
Russian-led offensive in northwest Syria led to the worst humanitarian crisis since the conflict began. The Syrians who took to the streets 10 years ago, demanding Assad to step down, are seeking a normal life now. After a decade of war, Assad's forces are back in control of more than 60% of the country, with the US and Turkish-led groups settled towards the north. So what is haunting some of the Syrians is a question. Was it all worth it? West Asia Bureau, WION. World is One.